Welcome, everyone. Come on in, grab a seat. Today, I am absolutely thrilled to be your professor for this explainer. We're going to take a deep dive into the origins of the Egyptian state, exploring the hard archaeological evidence of how this monumental civilization actually began. But we're also going to do something a little different. We're going to examine exactly why, in our modern era, we seek so much comfort in these ancient narratives. So it's a bit of a journey, right? From ancient artifacts to modern psychology, let's get started.
Here is our syllabus for today's lecture. We're covering 1. Unifying the Egyptian state, 2. Origins, evidence, and historical bias, 3. Visualizing royal majesty and power, 4. Pop culture versus academic debates, 5. Finding comfort in ancient history, and finally, 6. Student Q&A on escapism and resilience.
All right, part 1, unifying the Egyptian state.
So, to really understand this, we have to travel back to around 3000 BC. Picture this. Early farming villages along the Nile are undergoing a massive, unprecedented political transformation. And our foundational evidence for this is the famous Narmer palette. It's a carved piece of slate discovered way back in 1898 at Hierakonpolis. Now, this artifact is a huge deal because it provides our very first historical glimpse of a completely unified nation under a single ruler, King Narmer.
But this wasn't just a record of events. It was a massive political statement. The palette relies on these highly specific, honestly brutal visual symbols to project absolute royal dominance. You have King Narmer wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt on one side and then the red crown of Lower Egypt on the other. He's depicted in the classic pose of smiting the enemy, and there are literally processions leading toward rows of decapitated prisoners. I mean, it leaves absolutely zero doubt about who is in charge of this newly formed state.
Moving right along to Section 2, Origins, Evidence, and Historical Bias.
Having established that unification happened, we have to talk about how historians initially interpreted all this evidence. And this brings up a massive and, quite frankly, frustrating historiographical debate. You see, early scholars had a severe historical bias. Looking at the jaw-dropping scale of early Egypt, they just assumed, out of pure prejudice, that its roots had to come from the Near East or the Mediterranean. They actually called the idea of indigenous African roots illogical. Thankfully, modern archaeology completely shatters those outdated theories. Today, the consensus, backed by extensive skeletal, genetic, and material evidence, proves that the state developed internally, with populations migrating from the Sahara and the southern regions of Africa. Listen to how the UNESCO General History of Africa puts it. They explicitly state that Egypt is African, describing the rise of the state as a growing and unifying political movement in the valley from south to north. The international academic community has finally, rightfully, repositioned the starting point of pharaonic unification exactly where it belongs, back to Upper Egypt and its indigenous Saharan peoples.
It's honestly mind-boggling when you think about it. For decades, this deep-seated bias actively blinded researchers to the truth of Egypt's African heritage. It was a profound scientific failure, but one that modern science and objective digging have thoroughly corrected.
Okay, Section 3. Visualizing royal majesty and power. Let's talk about how this absolute control was built right into the physical landscape. When we think about the monumental pyramids and the ancient art from this era, it conveys a sense of enduring power that is almost hard for our modern brains to comprehend. You really have to remember, the pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was viewed as a living god. He was literally the son of Ra, and he was shouldering the impossible weight of the entire universe. So why the massive monuments? Well, the pharaoh had a universe-sized job. He was responsible for maintaining something called Ma'at, which basically translates to cosmic order and justice. The belief was that if the pharaoh failed to maintain Ma'at, the sun literally wouldn't rise, the Nile wouldn't flood, and Egypt would fall into total, utter chaos. When the stakes are the literal end of the world, their absolute, sometimes brutal rule suddenly seemed essential for everyday survival. Which brings us to Section 4, Pop Culture versus Academic Debates.
I can already hear someone in the back asking, but Professor, isn't Egypt all just mummies, curses, and magic? Well, Hollywood has spent decades selling us this beautifully romanticized fantasy of ancient Egypt, full of magic and simplistic heroics. But the academic reality? It's far grittier. Real history reveals a highly complex civilization wrestling with strict social boundaries, severe repressions, massive inequality, and environmental climate shifts. And, interestingly enough, those are struggles that mirror our own modern global issues incredibly closely.
And that connection leads us perfectly into Section 5, Finding Comfort in Ancient History. This is the meta-analysis portion of our lecture. Why do we, right now, in our intensely modern era,
deliberately seek out podcasts and explainers detailing the rise and fall of these ancient powers. Looking at the mock class poll we ran earlier, the data is pretty telling. A full 45% of you use the intimate storytelling of history podcasts directly to escape modern stress. 35% are seeking clarity on today's chaotic world. And hey, 20% of you are just using these grand tales to lull a baby to sleep, which is totally fair. There's this fantastic quote from journalist and avid podcast listener Oscar Rickett. He was relying heavily on historical narratives during the COVID lockdowns, all while dealing with a severe family illness. He noted that the grand, sweeping narratives of the ancient world offered a profound, transporting relief from his own personal emotional turmoil.
It makes total sense when you think about it. We are constantly bombarded with news about economic crises, climate change, pandemics. It's a lot. Immersing ourselves in the history of long-gone civilizations acts as a highly effective psychological buffer. The ancient world provides a structured, boundaried escape from our own present-day dark times.
Let's wrap things up with Section 6, Student Q&A on Escapism and Resilience.
Looking at the debate topics you all submitted, here's a really great one. When we listen to tales of the Sumerians or the Egyptians, are we truly escaping, or are we simply ignoring our current global crises? Is this a genuine relief or just a temporary distraction?
It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? On one hand, these stories provide genuine, much-needed relief. They give us a mental break through intimate storytelling and provide a much broader perspective on human survival. On the other hand, a fantasy of escape is ultimately just a fantasy. The listener always has to return to their personal grief and the realities of modern life. But perhaps that temporary mental break is exactly what gives us the strength to face the present.
All right, next question. And this one is fascinating. Why on earth do stories about the complete collapse of ancient civilizations actually make us feel a sense of calm today? It seems totally counterintuitive to find comfort in the violent fall of an empire when we are so stressed out about our own world.
Podcaster Paul Cooper really hit the nail on the head here. He points out that the feeling of living through a uniquely disruptive or chaotic time, well, that's not a unique feeling at all. People have felt that exact same way throughout all of human history. Realizing that ancient peoples also believed their world was ending gives us incredible comfort and clarity. It proves that this feeling of impending doom is a shared human experience across millennia.
Ultimately, by understanding these ancient power struggles, the unifications, the desperate attempts to maintain Ma'at, the inevitable societal collapses, we gain vital historical perspective. Studying past civilizations fosters our own personal resilience. It's living proof that humanity has endured and survived monumental crises, massive inequality, and complete collapse time and time again.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on after class. When future generations look back at the chaos of our present day, what stories will they listen to in order to find their own comfort and resilience? How will the history that we are living and writing right now serve as a reassuring escape for the students of tomorrow? Thank you all for joining me for this explainer. Class dismissed.